Dave Wilson, a fantastic writer. Dave, when I texted you before I finished reading your column today because I felt, even though I'm scrolling on my phone, mentally I was sitting like reading Sports Illustrated or the newspaper. It was written in that, old school form. It took me back, the style of writing. And this is how most of your columns do, but this one really did kind of take me back a little bit. It had a nice old school vibe to it.
Well, I'm generally kind of an old guy myself. I do tend to lean toward history and all the things that we romanticize about college football. I actually think there's a desire for a lot of that now, because a lot of people don't like what college football is right now, and until we get it figured out, people like to reminisce a little bit.
Yeah, and you have a very personal connection in the story on ESPN.com. We are what we drive, how car dealers became and this is layered through 50 years or more of college. I mean, I'm pretty sure that John David Crow probably bought a car with that money they kicked out of the helicopter for him back in the day in 1954, whenever that was. But was it your dad or your grandfather?
My dad.
Your dad was in this world. How much did that, how much of that, sitting on that for all this time, make you really want to put this down on paper and get it out?
I just always loved, every day when I got home from school, I'm from Kilgore in East Texas. Every day when I got home from school, I would go to sit in my dad's couch in his office. And, he's a Pontiac Buick GMC dealer in East Texas, which meant it was basically a GMC dealer. And, I would sit there and read automotive news, and I would go with him to conventions and meetings. And these guys were like larger than life characters to me. I mean, they're really not that different than coaches. I mean, there's one, they all have the same job. They all have the same product. It's a matter of which guy makes you feel, or which man or woman makes you feel the right way. And so, I just grew up. I know my dad grew up in a really small town, Cheapside, Texas, which is a ghost town now. His dad was an alcoholic, made him quit school to get a job. And the first guy that gave him a job was a car dealer in Victoria. And he just always felt like he owed it to everybody to give back because they had taken care of him. And I think, there's a lot of negative images of car dealers and about those things. And there are bad ones for sure. But I think a lot of them, they're very civic minded. They pay a lot of school taxes. They pay a lot of, they supply the cars for the parade, for the youth trips. And I think a lot of them feel very, very civic minded. And I don't know why that is. And so I just always thought, you watch NIL, you see all these things. And I'm like, people are like, how is this happening? I'm like, I know how it's happening, because those guys all want their school to win. They want them to succeed. In the old days, they had to do it under the table, but now it's all legal. So that's why it's happening the way it is.
Yeah, I do. It's kind of like car dealers, attorneys, chiropractors, kind of like 98% of them all are just fine. But the ones that are crooked are so crooked that it casts this really, big net on oh, well, they all have to be like this because they're all like that. All chiropractors went to the University of Peru. No, it's not like that at all. But, and again, and because this was so frowned upon, I'm sure every Big Red Motors and, all of that makes it look worse. But like you've described it, it's more of, look, we're Big Red Motors in Norman, Oklahoma. We're going to help the Oklahoma Sooners. We're right in, College Station, Texas. We're going to help the Aggies. That's how people felt about it.
Well, every town had those guys. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And especially in the Southwest Conference era, when every man for himself. You knew who the Arkansas guy was. You knew who the Baylor guy was. You knew who the SMU guy was. And then the Aggies, the Longhorns, Tech, all that stuff. So everybody kind of had their go-to guy. I knew when I was growing up, there was a kid from around where we grew up that drove off to Arkansas in a really nice car, and his dad and the dealer happened to be a one of the biggest Arkansas boosters there was. And so you always heard the stories and saw it. It was almost more fun then, when it wasn't on the Facebook page of the dealer saying, "Here's my new Corvette." Because my question to all these guys was, why do you want, as great a kid as Bijan Robinson is, I would see him in Austin in his Lamborghini, and I'm like, do you really want your first round draft pick running back driving a Lamborghini? We were all teenagers once. That's a pretty tempting thing. So I think that's part of the shock value, is that Carson Beck had 2 Lamborghinis stolen from his house. That it's shocking, but it's the reality of the situation. And so I was really surprised, honestly, like when I call up Christopher Late, who said he's had 27 Texas players on NIL, and he just said, it's like, "Oh yeah, here's how it works. Here's how I do it." There's no hang up the phone. I'm not talking to you about this. No, we want to be known as the guy that delivers for the Longhorns.
Here's what I was told when I was at FSU, how they used to do it was they would sign a lease because look, if I lease you, if I'm the car dealer and it's my car, it's my inventory, I can lease you a car for however much a month I've decided is fair for our business and you. There are the standard lease rates that come down from the company, but if I wanted to lease you one for $20 a month, it's within my right to do so. And
Right.
Then I can just call back the lease at any time I want to. So I can give Peter Warwick a solid gold Escalade for $20 a month. And, it's legal, and then I can give another one to somebody else who has nothing to do with FSU football to see, I just do this for people that need it, if they ever got called a question.
Obviously, we all talk about, Dickerson's Trans Am. Eric Dickerson's Trans Am was the most famous car in college football history. Everyone knew what happened to that. Everyone knew the Aggies bought it for him, and he drove it to SMU. And that's what people loved about it. It was a classic Southwest Conference story. And there was nothing anybody could do about it. The car was in his grandmother's name. He said his grandmother bought it for him. There was no evidence to the contrary. But now he tells that story. But that was how it worked, and it's really no different than it works now. Guys, the collective might buy the car and they title in the kid's name so that the kid has to pay insurance, or other people may have different deals where they loan them a demo, or what they call a demo. They get to drive it and then return it, and they sell it, and the insurance is part of the dealership package. So there's different ways that people do it, but I think it's really identical to the old school way that we all would whisper about or hear about.
So just briefly, because I want people to read this, but my favorite part of this is your the story of W.O. Bankston. Tell us about W.O.
So W.O. was a legendary figure in Dallas. He was he came to Dallas on a rail car. Yeah, I think he had 18 cents to his name when he arrived in Dallas, and he befriended the sheriff. I think he got arrested or something for not having any money and being transient. And then he befriended the sheriff, and somehow he started making his way, and he ends up having some jobs and making some money, and he buys a dealership in the 30s. And he just was a guy who did things his own way. He literally hired an escaped convict from Alcatraz, who was one of Bonnie and Clyde's contemporaries, to be his night watchman at his dealership, and then got a senator buddy named Lyndon B. Johnson to help pardon him. And W.O. just believed in doing things his way, and he thought if it wasn't fair, then he was going to take care of it. And one of those deals was SMU football players he thought deserved better. And so he had Nissan in the 80s when the 240Z or cars like that, maybe that was still Datsun, were popular. They were all the rage, like I said in the story, akin to like the Dodge Charger now. Every college football player seems to drive a Dodge Charger. And so the president of the guy who ran the Texas Automobile Dealers Association for 40 years said, if you went to SMU's parking lot, it looked like WO's front line. And so it was just a matter of look, these kids deserve it. They're playing for us. We're all in the stands watching them. It's all the stuff that became NIL, but WO was already on that train a long time ago.
So, so your dad, where does he fit in the NIL before NIL car business?
So I could never get him to give a car to Adrian Peterson when he was, 60 miles down the road. No, he was, like I said, he didn't go to college. He was really poor. I got him to take me to some A&M Arkansas. I remember taking him to an A&M Arkansas game in '89, and he loved Kyle Field and he fell in love with the Aggies. And he's a small town guy. He loved RC Slocum and he loved the Aggies. So he joined the Aggie Wheels team, where he loaned a car for a coach to drive, like on recruiting trips.
Mm-hmm.
And in return, he got like 50-yard line tickets. He got to go on a road trip with the team every year, one game a year. He would go on a band trip every once in a while. He loved the Aggie band. My dad was like just a character like all these guys. He somehow collected friends, and like the Aggie band director was a pallbearer at his funeral, even though he never even went to A&M or had anything to do with it. But he loved being a part of it. He loved and it really didn't cost him anything. He would loan a car, they would drive it for like 10,000 miles. Somebody would bring it back, they would sell it. He got what's called a demo allowance from General Motors for having it on the road. There were certain models that they just wanted on the road. And it would come home, and the trunk would be full of, track suits and t-shirts and all kinds of swag. And so he thought it was the coolest thing ever that he got all these perks for something that really didn't cost him anything. And it worked. It worked for both. I called RC during the writing of the story and just said, "Hey, how did that work?" And he said it was a big deal. It was like a coach getting a, $500 a month raise essentially, and not having to worry about maintenance or anything. So it just made sense for a lot of reasons. And it was a lot more innocent in that regard when you're dealing with the school and not the players.
Yeah. I drove I've driven a couple from one of our sponsors, Alan Samuels, a couple of program cars that they were like, oh, well, we gave this one to Scott Drew or Kim Mulkey or, Matt Rule when they were driving around, and, my car's in the shop, and then I've gotten to drive it, and then we talk about it on the air. So yeah, I've ridden in a couple of those. I've taken a spin on a couple of those program cars. Back to Eric Dickerson is the most famous one of this.
Yeah.
And my favorite part about that story is that the people who gave him the car initially said, well, we've got to report them. And then like somebody was like, well, how do we do that? Like they're not cheating fairly. Is that what you want to say? Like, hey, we got to this kid first and we cheated first, so he should be going here. Like that is so it's just wild to think about when you look back on that era.
Yeah, it's like a drug dealer calling the cops on somebody that didn't pay them for their drugs or something. So it was like a situation that it was a no-win if you're the guy that paid for the car and then he drove it to, he said it was a guy named Clarence Shear, who was a rice farmer in Sealy. Phil Bennett actually knew him. Phil Bennett and I have talked about this. Phil Bennett was outside Eric's house the night before signing day with a lot of the other Aggie coaches, and they all knew the story. It was just a matter of, there's nothing they could do about it when Eric changed his mind. And they couldn't go tell on him for taking their car to SMU, or else, they were the ones that were going to get in trouble. So, Eric kind of was the trendsetter there. And it was, all these years later, the one thing that always bothered me, though, is I always want to know, like, everyone talked about the Trans Am. There were pictures of it. There were, it was like a paparazzi thing. And then it just vanished. And I never heard about it. So that was one of the joys for me for this, was that Eric actually told me what happened to the Trans Am, and that's at the end of the story, which I don't think I've ever heard or seen reported before. So that was a cool little thing for me as a total child of the Southwest Conference and a nerd about this stuff. My little part of history there.
Yeah, well, there's the nice tease to leave that there. I think I was at SMU FSU last year, and they had two people in cars come out before the game. One was Eric Dickerson, the other was President Bush and Laura Bush, and they came out, and I think that SMU missed the boat on their ACC entrance. They had just had him in a regular, like, convertible sedan. They should have had him in a Trans Am.
Now they did that. They actually did that the year before, I believe. They started trotting out videos of Dickerson in a gold Trans Am, sort of when they were getting the band back together and all the oilmen were coming together to get serious about SMU coming back. And that was sort of the image of like, hey, we're back. You know, we got we have the attitude back and the swagger back, because that was really the thing with SMU was they had the people and they had the money. There was just not a lot of desire when they were playing teams that they didn't care about playing, like East Carolina and Navy and people like that. So once they knew they had an opportunity, that the guys jumped back in the boat pretty quick.
Yeah. Well, Dave, thanks so much for hopping on. I always love your stuff. I particularly enjoyed this one. It was really different and nostalgic, and just job well done. So happy you could come on the show and talk about it. I'm gonna have Andrew put the link to the story in the description and everything, and put it out on social media as well to help push it, because it's really, really good. So Dave, certainly appreciate it. Hey, the season's here tomorrow.
Right.
That's right.
In Ireland. Who knew?
Who you got?
Probably K-State. I mean, it's actually a really good sneaky game. I mean, that's obviously the Big 12. I think 10 teams could win the league. So this will be our first, because you know, I think Iowa State was really good last year, and Kansas State maybe underachieved a little bit, but they think Avery Johnson's going to be really good. So I don't know. I think it's a fascinating one. The whole year is going to be fascinating in the Big 12.
Absolutely. Dave Wilson, ESPN.com. Dave, I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.